All right, all right, all right. Hey, Colin, what did the Ramones say?
Ramon said, "Hey ho, let's go."
And man, do we have a great episode of Legends and Losers today, don't we?
Yes, we do.
You didn't say losers with me.
I know you was very fast. You sort of snuck it up on me.
Oh, do you want to try it now? Legends and Losers. And if you're a regular listener or viewer, for those of you on the YouTube machine, you started to notice we're beginning to bring in some guest hosts. And we have a guest host today, don't we, Colin?
Yes, we have a host with the most.
So welcome to Legends and Losers, Scott Lowry.
It's awesome to be here, guys. Thank you.
And it's great to have you on Legends and Losers. There's a lot of reasons it's great to have Scott on Legends and Losers. But one I'll just highlight is he's the creator of the official Legends and Losers surfboard.
Yes, he is. It's right there.
Yeah, it's right on the wall of the studio.
And it's a Robert August surfboard, no less, which is one of the two gentlemen from
Endless Summer. And one of the most legendary shapers in California. And Scott was kind enough to have Robert and crew build me a custom longboard with the Legends and Losers logo on the nose of the board and on the bottom of the board, and some Big Lebowski quotes and shit. It's very inside, like glassed in. There's Legends and Losers logo and Big Lebowski quotes glassed into the board.
So cool.
So Scott.
Yes, we had a lot of inside help. Candace was huge in helping us with that for sure, and Laura from Flourishing Leadership Institute, she did a lot.
Thank you, Laura.
Team effort pulling this off.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. It's a very thoughtful gift. And Scott runs a company called Fathom, and he is an entrepreneur who empowers other entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And do you want to give us a couple seconds on Fathom at fathomdelivers.com?
Absolutely. So we do revenue acceleration marketing. We specialize in working with mid-sized companies selling high consideration things that want to kick ass.
What's a high consideration thing? Like, should I or shouldn't I jump off this bridge? Or?
Yeah, right. High consequence decisions. So typically expensive long-term decisions. So an example would be do a lot of work in higher ed. So choosing a college is a high consideration decision. We also do a lot of work for B2B firms. So selling expensive stuff takes a long time to decide. Oftentimes it's a long-term relationship that happens after the fact. So we help modern marketers reimagine how they're talking to their customers today. Lots of different touch points. We do all the modern marketing stuff. We've been doing it for 15 years.
And you're headquartered in a fun part of the country.
Yeah, we're in the Midwest, right outside of Cleveland. And so we like to try to keep things simple there, and we call it revenue acceleration marketing because we want to never forget what this is about. It's about making
marketing to accelerate revenue.
Revenue, period. That's it. End of story. So that's what we do.
Well, it's great to have you here, and a fellow entrepreneur, and somebody who's deeply committed to entrepreneurship, and someone who is a very close friend of our guest today. Colin, do you want to tell our legendary friends who's our guest?
Yes, Jon Berghoff.
And Scotty, who's Jon Berghoff?
Wow, so that's a big question, and
we don't have to tell the soul story. Just give him a little taste, and we'll get back to him.
I know we're going to have some time with him. You did this amazing interview. But I the best way I can describe Jon is I think about the first time I had met him, and I was told about Jon by several people. One of them was my business partner, who's a remarkable guy and very seldom gets excited about people. And he came up to me and said, "You got to meet this Jon guy." And that wasn't the first time I heard that. And so I tracked Jon down. We both live in Cleveland. He had a lot of involvement with a business school that we both work with. Called the Weatherhead School of Management, and we sort of met through that community. And when I first met Jon, I didn't understand this because it took me a while to get to know what he's all about. But he had this sort of eerie presence about him, like he was absorbing everything.
Eerie, like
spooky,
like Dick Cheney kind of eerie.
Yeah.
Or
So I felt like everything I said, he was absorbing and processing at like a very deep level, and as I got to know him, I realized, John's one of these guys. He's constantly curious. He's constantly learning, and he's using that to change what he's doing, create new behaviors, get better results. And he's that kind of guy who's just constantly learning, applying, experimenting. And he's done that in his personal life. He's doing that through business today. And then he figures out, hey, I found some really cool new technology or idea that's helping me get more in my life. How can I share this with as many people as possible? So I've seen him do that personally. He's doing a lot of that work through the Flourishing Leadership Institute today, and he's remarkable at his ability to synthesize and put things into action, create massive results, and do that on a huge scale. And
that was a big sentence right there.
Yeah, that's a lot. John's a lot.
All right, well, we're going to get to Jon in a second. We wanted to touch on a couple of topics that have been on my mind. Did you guys see this article in Fast Company? Why more tech companies are hiring people without degrees?
Just what you want to hear when you're graduating college.
Man, I didn't have to go. Yeah, it's interesting, particularly for someone like me, because I don't have a degree. Far from it. But you hear a lot of tech companies who wouldn't consider hiring you if you weren't a Stanford grad. And, now to read that some of the hottest companies in Silicon Valley are looking at other criteria than where did you go to school. What does that make you guys think? Well, it makes me think we're going to start playing this guitar ad.
Jeez Louise. A surprise guest.
Yeah, and now Johnny Cash. Actually, we'll chase that zebra for a second.
Okay.
Seth Godin wrote his legendary book, Permission Marketing, 20 fucking years ago, right?
And we still haven't figured it out.
Well, and the whole premise of the book, it's a great book. He's a genius. The book says, in the future, the marketing that is going to be the most powerful is marketing that we opt into. Thus, permission marketing. When I say, hey, put me on your mailing list, right? Well, I don't know about you, but every fucking website I go to today is stuffed with attack, distraction marketing.
It has nothing to do with
what's the opposite of permission? Illegal, offensive, attacking, violating, home invasion. That's what it is.
Invited.
It's web homepage invasion marketing. That's what it is. Every visit to a homepage is homepage invasion marketing. Holy.
Hey, so do you see your page and my page?
Yeah.
My page doesn't have all this shit.
Well, would you have some kind of a pop-up blocker or something?
Ad blocker.
Yeah. Maybe you need to help the old dude out with that. Anyways, but I digress. This article goes on to say IBM's head of talent organization, Sam Lada. How would you say that? Yeah. Whatever. Sorry, Sam. He says, quote, "We consider them based on their skills and don't take into account their educational background. This includes applicants who don't get a 4-year degree, but proven their technical knowledge in some other ways." Quote, "We've been very successful in hiring from coding boot camps."
Yeah, well, the skill sets are changing. They're shifting, and the universities are still stuck in an old skill set.
So in 2017, we're figuring out, hey, we should hire people based on their skills.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it also reflects the access to learning is so easy today. There's very few paths that require a formal educational institution. I think that's really cool. I think that's a big deal.
It's a great point.
Well, I like to say there's no excuse for being stupid today.
Right. It's not hard to find out how.
Well, when you have schools like Stanford and MIT and many others putting huge amounts of their curriculum online, and then podcasts, right? I don't care what you love. If you love Jamaican boat building, there's a podcast with a Jamaican boat building expert sharing her knowledge. And so we've never lived at a time, right? I mean, remember when you had to go to the library?
I'd like to just mention something. Y Combinator has something that's called startupschool.org, and they're releasing all their content for free. So if you're interested, I highly recommend you go visit that site.
Y Combinator, startupschool.org.
Yes.
and on and on. So yeah, I mean, there's never been a greater time, and there's no excuse for being stupid.
Well, on the other hand, if you're going to go, if you want to be a doctor and you want to operate on people, you need certain things like dead bodies and laboratories,
Hey,
environments,
dude, it's okay. I've been watching these YouTube videos, and I can install that valve in your heart, man. I'm saying I got this.
My dad's got an ultimate set of tools.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think if you're going to go down that path, a traditional path still makes a lot of sense.
I would agree.
There's a lot of other things that
pilots. I'm a big fan of pilots too.
Yes.
Being certified by somebody. Yes. But if you want the education without the diploma, there are a lot of things that you can go do that with. So anyway, I just thought it was cool. And it may also just mean that we're at virtual unemployment in Silicon Valley. So we're just going to have to start hiring morons. It could mean that too. Myself included, by the way. All right, so our dear friend Dushka sent me a funny little note. So Dushka, who's been a guest on the show, and she's actually our first guest.
Yes.
And our first second-time guest, the legendary writer Dushka Zapata. And she sent me this funny thing I wanted to share with you guys. And for those of you who are not familiar with Dushka's writing, when she talks about her significant relationship person, she refers to him as boyfriend. So I've met boyfriend. I know boyfriend. I don't know if I'm allowed to disclose boyfriend publicly. I don't know why she calls him, like if he just doesn't.
Well, maybe she's so famous that she wants to protect his identity.
Yeah, so I think boyfriend is incognito. So anyway, that's important to know. So this is a Legends and Losers discussion she had with boyfriend that she shared. Quote, boyfriend insists the plural of asparagus is asparagi, and as often as possible inserts it into a sentence.
Because he likes saying it.
Quote, I made asparagi for dinner. Would you like some?
I would just laugh if somebody said that.
So I think boyfriend's on the team. And then she goes on to say, quote, he also claims the plural of platypus. You ready?
I know what's coming.
Platypi.
Of course. As it would be.
She goes on to say, quote, now I see asparagus and platypus, and I feel the need to make an edit. Boyfriend is messing with my brain. End quote. Yeah, boyfriend.
That's the key at the end.
And I still think the plural of Elvis is not Elvis's, as in you're in Vegas walking down the street and you go, hey, shit, Scott, look at all the Elvises coming. I think the plural is Elvi.
I think you're right.
So I'm kind of with boyfriend. And then, do you remember, did you ever watch
Pee-wee?
Thank you. You're so great, Scott. Watch now as I drink water and Scott talks. Or Scott talks and, I don't know, I talk and he drinks water or something like that. So Pee-wee's Playhouse, right? Well, tell them what you were talking about.
What a fun show that was.
Well, I vaguely recall they had a word of the day, and every time the word came up, everybody had to do something significant.
Yeah, you had to like clang pots and stuff.
Yeah,
and the most evil part of it was that he would cast it after the show and say, for the rest of the day, kids, when you hear this word, you should yell and scream in whatever environment, especially if it's school or inappropriate.
Yeah. So we wanted to propose in honor of Pee-wee's Playhouse a word of the day. And Colin and I were talking about this word a couple of days ago, and we don't hear this word enough. And the word is liquor.
We don't hear this word enough?
Don't you think? You don't hear the word liquor.
You know?
No, you don't think, I like that liquor. That was really good liquor you brought over. And then the other one, I don't know, is this a Canadian one? I don't know. Do you guys have this? Liquored up.
Well, that's what's not as frequent.
Because that one's really good too. It's like, hey, be careful over there with Sandra. She likes to get really liquored up.
Yeah, no, you don't hear that so often.
You don't hear liquored up.
No.
And then there used to be, I remember remarking on it when I moved here, because in Canada, alcohol sales are fairly constrained, particularly in Ontario. The Ontario government is actually the largest purchaser of wine in the world because they control the distribution of booze. And
makes sense.
And you can only get it if it's like the third Thursday with a half moon and, you know, all that shit, right? So you sort of got to plan your sales. And so you
Your
can
sales or
imagine
your purchases.
your purchases, excuse me. So when I first started come down here, you know, to the Excited States, and I drive, and I'm driving by, I'll never forget seeing this store. It doesn't, I think they went bankrupt, but it was called the Liquor Barn.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember the Liquor Barn?
I do remember that. I haven't seen them for a long time.
And I remember walking into a liquor barn in, I don't know if it was Campbell or, you know, somewhere in Silicon Valley.
Was it a drive-through where you could pull in?
No. Although
Those are pretty cool.
As a Canadian, the concept of a drive-through liquor barn just blows my mind.
It's a popular feature in Ohio.
All right, and
yeah, I didn't even know they existed. And then you've seen these?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it really does wonders for drinking and driving, doesn't it?
Right.
Like you don't. Hey. If you're so drunk you can't get out of your car to buy alcohol, come here.
We got you covered.
They're popular in Ohio?
More rural Ohio. You see them around.
How do you say that word?
Rural Ohio.
Rural.
Yeah, that was really good.
Rural.
You can confuse that with a place like an Ohio.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. Okay, Scott, why don't you tee up John and we'll get on with it.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that article you shared. So John, went from being an average high school student to joining a direct sales organization as a young man, and rapidly became the top sales guy in that organization. It was like 10,000 plus, people, and set records over time, and really kind of followed this pattern that I've noticed.
I thought it was bigger than that.
I think at the time there were 10,000 people doing what he did, and he was number one. And then over time, there's been millions over the years, and he's set records. And
he's still the number one. Yeah, it's
up there.
Yeah, over 1 million people who've sold Cutco.
Yeah,
he's number one.
So to me, it reflects the way he operates. So he got into that environment. And his basic strategy was, okay, who are the top 10 guys? And he would call them, what are you guys doing? What's working? What's not working? And then he would go outside and do everything he could learn about selling in that way, and just became, it was very rapid.
You think about this. How many people in the world can say, out of 1 million people who did this thing, I'm number one?
Yep.
That's Berghoff.
Yep.
And that's selling door-to-door knives.
That's incredible.
And so he made
that's some old school Zig Ziglar shit right there.
Right. And so he demonstrated early on that it was about building that skill set. So he got, really focused on becoming awesome at building that skill. And over time, he then became a coach to lots of Cutco reps. So that pattern of, okay, I gained access to this new method or this new approach that works. How can I share this and make a bigger impact? And then when I met John, he was running sales at Vitamix. So he'd already kind of moved into a bigger stage, and he'll probably share the stats, but it was, massive transformation in 3 or 4 years.
At Vitamix, when he took over as head of sales at 27 years old, he took sales from 40 million to 175 million in 3 years.
Yeah. And a lot of so now he was getting into a lot of leadership development, culture shaping concepts of not only how do you become awesome at selling and doing things as an individual and sharing it to other individuals. Now he's thinking about, how do I affect massive change at the scale of a whole organization?
And that's where he gets to flourishing leadership, right?
Yeah. And so he's thinking about that. Over the years, he's developed amazing expertise in facilitation, experiential learning, leadership development, culture shaping. He's starting to synthesize all these ideas. And then he says, hey, how can we take the kind of impact that we made at Vitamix using these next level methods and motivations for most naturally bringing out the best in a business? And how can we share this with lots and lots of companies? And
so now he's an entrepreneur on a mission to make a difference.
And so John and I, the thing that I was excited most about John is that he's really good at what he does. But the thing that's most attractive to me about him is the fact that he's on a huge mission. He wants to make a multi-generational impact in the world.
And man, is he fun and funny. He's got a quirky sense of humor. And did you know that his wedding was featured on the Learning Channel's Wild Wedding.
I didn't know that. I knew it was an amazing wedding.
Yeah, no, I was not at the wedding, but
People had to train to go to his wedding.
They got married at Half Dome, and so they taped it, and it was featured on Wild Weddings. So with that, without any further ado, we're not going to give any more adoing. There'll be no more adoing. Our dialogue with the legendary Jon Berghoff.
And NBC always does this production of it that's just, it's like they turn it into this motivational show for an hour, producing that Ironman, all the human interest stories, not just the winners, but everybody else. And there's a year, I think it was 1994. And I think it was Mark Allen's last year doing it. And so he becomes
I think he was a little later than that. I think he was like 97, 98, but I could be wrong.
I don't remember the year. 99 might have been it. But the point is, that year in that DVD, we have a copy of it.
Yeah.
And we play that at our sales meetings, and he is the featured human interest story. And they show him in his last final Hawaii Ironman and how he's like seeing himself break down, realizing that he used to be able to win. It's just an amazing story. And what he brings to that episode is, it makes the whole thing.
Have you met Mark Allen?
No.
Well, yeah, as we were just talking about, Triathlete Magazine calls him the greatest triathlete of all time, and he lives a couple of blocks from me. And most importantly, I met him because years ago we hired him to come do a motivational speech for us because he's an incredible speaker.
Yeah.
And I really took a shine to him. And then, of course, I lost touch with him, as you do. And when I moved to Santa Cruz, I'm hanging out with a buddy of mine who lives just a couple blocks over, my buddy Mike Block. And walking by is Mark Allen in a wetsuit. The greatest triathlete of all time. Anyway, so we reconnected. I'm hoping to have him on Legends and Losers soon. And but you should Mark Allen's a great speaker if you want to hire him to come do some speaking for you.
Yeah, that's great to know. It's a great thought. He'd be great.
How did you get into this? I know you do you triathlete as well as extreme marathon?
No, I don't even own a bike. I kind of like the minimalist nature of running. It's like I could do it anytime I want. I don't need equipment,
And
I don't own a pair of swim goggles either.
I could never get into the swimming part. I love to surf and I'm a strong swimmer, but like going and doing laps in a pool just seems like somebody taking a fucking hockey stick to my nuts.
Yeah, it's why I run on trails. I can't run on pavement. I get bored out of my mind.
Yeah, well, and obviously it's the bang, 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 bang of pavement is not.
I don't think it's healthy.
Not that awesome for you. How did you get into extreme trail running and distance athletics?
So it started. I was inspired by a buddy of mine who my buddy Jon Vroman was starting a wish organization called the Front Row Foundation. And he sends out.
You're going to explain all of this, right?
Yeah. I was about to say, when do we start the show? And then I see you're recording.
No, this isn't a show. This is a couple of dudes over beers talking.
Well, that's why I realized, for all I know, this is how they all start. And then after an hour, you go, we're done.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man.
So I got into it because I had a buddy doing it. And it was to raise money and awareness for the Front Row Foundation. And then after I did a 50 miler where I just struggled my way through it.
Now hold on a second. How long does it take you to run fucking 50 miles?
Well, if you know what you're doing, a lot less time than what it took me and all my buddies who didn't train.
Okay, well, what did it take you? Just give me some context.
Yeah, like
here.
12, 13 hours, that kind of thing.
13 hours so how many miles a minute is that? Or miles?
I mean, not very many. You're talking.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
When you average that out, it's like 4 miles a minute or something.
Yeah, that sounds fast to me because, I mean, I do not have a runner's body. I've run for most of my adult life off and on, and I've run
4 miles an hour, not a minute. That's what I meant to say.
4 miles an hour. Yeah. Okay. No. So yeah, that's what I meant to. Hey, nobody said there would be math, Berghoff. So I only ran one marathon. I ran a marathon in 1999. I ran the Rock and Roll Marathon in San Diego, which I highly recommend to other new marathoners. Because have you run that marathon by chance?
No.
I know you're a
haven't.
San Diego guy, or you like San Diego. I think the thing that you'd like about that marathon is they have a live rock band every hour or every mile or so. Excuse me, I'm confusing hours and miles right now. But and then at the end they have like a big concert. And so that it's a good distraction if you're a new runner. But so I'm trying to remember, my time was somewhere around 4:15, 4:20, something like that. 4:20. Haha. Isn't that funny? But it was over 4 hours, but I don't think I was 4.5. So I don't remember exactly, but, and so that's about the pace you run the 50 milers at.
Yeah, and then the 100-miler, I've done 100-miler, and that took me 27 and a half hours. That run is worth telling the story in the episode too, because the whole, I've given a whole keynote on that one experience.
Well, so why don't you tell us about what is it like to run for 100 miles?
I will.
Okay, well, you're gonna make me wait, or what?
Oh, I thought there was actually an official time where you were going to start and say, we're going to start recording for the episode now.
We don't. This is not how this works, right? We just have a dialogue. So you started talking, and so that's it. So tell me about running 100 miles, John.
Yeah, so it was June 2008, and it was the Old Dominion 100-miler, which is, I think it might be the oldest 100-mile trail race in the country. So it's been going on for a while. And I wanted to do it as just kind of a personal journey. And it was also to raise some awareness and money for the Front Row Foundation.
Yeah, and you'll explain the Front Row Foundation in a little bit.
Yeah, happily.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that particular run, what was interesting is what was going on in my business at that time in my life. I didn't really have time to train the way I think you were supposed to. So I did a lot of yoga, a lot of Bikram yoga.
I hear in all the running books they recommend if you're going to run 300 miles, just do a lot of yoga.
Yeah, that's it.
You'll be bendy as you're dying. You'll be dying and bendy.
The night before the race, I get there and there's this, it's in the Shenandoah Valley, and you meet under like a big tent, and there's all the other runners there. And I'm asking these people, and I'm looking around, and their legs are like the size of tree trunks. And I'm like this like skinny guy. And I'm asking,
but there's got to be a lot of skinny guys. I mean, the Kenyans are pretty skinny, and last time I checked, they do pretty well in winning a lot of these races.
They do, apparently.
But are trail runners built differently than marathon runners, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I'm such an amateur at it, and I always go run by myself in the middle of the woods. I don't see anybody else, so I don't really know what everyone else looks like. But this 100-miler. The night before, I'm asking the other runners, like, what do you do to train for this? And they're explaining to me, they're like, well, 2 weeks ago, I did a 50-mile race. And then 2 weeks before that, I did 50 miles. And I'm thinking my longest run was 12 miles for this race.
Wait a minute. I just want to make sure I understand. So you signed up to do a 100-mile race, and your longest race was 12 miles before that?
My longest training run for that 100-mile
Your longest training run?
Yeah, it was about 12 miles. But I also did yoga that day too.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Your chakras were aligned, and your prana was flowing, and you were namasteing.
Apparently, I had one guy the night before the race who I'm asking everybody, what's your best advice? Because at this point, that's more training than I've done, and people. And this one guy goes, you just need to know that somewhere between mile 60 and mile 70, your body is going to completely stop working. And he's like, at that point, you've got to dig deeper and find something that kicks in. And that's like exactly what ended up happening the next day. Because what Mother Nature was really helping us out. It turned out to be the hottest day of the year. It was when we started at 4 a.m. on the Saturday, it was like 95 degrees, humid. And it just got hotter.
It was 95 at 4 a.m., John?
Yeah. If you go back June 8th or 9th, I think, 2008, it ended up being the hottest recorded day of the year in Virginia. The day of our 100-mile trail run. So 50 people started the race, and 20 people finished. So that tells you something. A lot of people wanted to finish and didn't. I was one of the lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it.
And so tell me about the experience. You start running, and then what happens at 4 a.m.?
Yeah, so everybody starts and it's dark. So you have these headlamps, and there's something about running in the dark that's kind of surreal, where it almost makes it a little bit easier to pass the time, because it just feels like you're already beating this video game by the fact that you're running in the dark at 4 a.m. And I'll never forget, at the start of the run, I met, you feel a very, like a kindred spirit when you're standing there with 50 other people that are about to run 100 miles in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley. You feel connected to everybody. We're all a bunch of idiots here. And there was one guy I met, his name was Ron. And Ron he was doing this run as a gift to himself for his 50th birthday. And, the long story, as you would say, made longer. What was interesting is I had all sorts of trials and tribulations. And at mile 84, when 50 people start a 100-mile race, after a few miles, you're basically by yourself. Once in a while, you run into another runner. And at mile 84, the next morning at about 3 or 4 a.m., in the middle of absolute nowhere, I'm like tiptoeing along the side of a creek, and I run into Ron, and we finish the last 14, 15 miles together. That was something I'll always remember.
And what was it like for your body? I mean, what was your physical experience as you went through the 100 miles?
Yeah, painful. And part of the goal that I've discovered as an amateur of all amateur trail distance runners is that the human body is capable. It's capable of a lot more than I think we give ourselves credit. And I found that I can get to a point where I kind of hit an equilibrium. And there's an equilibrium where the pain is there and it's not going to go away, but it's also not going to get too much worse. And so I find that there gets to a point where it's a certain speed where it's like, okay, if I can keep this going, if I keep nourishing myself with the right nutrients, these long distance runs become a science project. You have to know as much about how to replenish as you do about running.
So you're running with a pack on your back full of obviously a camelback type of a thing.
There's a camelback, yeah, and it's an official race. So every 7 miles or so, there's an aid station where they've got Scooby snacks and Gatorade and whatever you're willing to eat.
Snacks. Have you had those Cliff? I think they're called Cliff Chews or Cliff Shots. They're like a square gummy bear, a Cliff Yumness.
Yeah, it feels and tastes like candy, but the wrapper says it's more than that.
Yeah,
I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. I love those on long hikes and take them on surf trips and like that. They make one that has a little bit of caffeine in it that gives you a little something. That's the one I like. So every 7 miles.
Yeah, every 5 to 7 miles or so, there'd be an aid station. And at certain checkpoints, they weigh you, because if your body weight changes too much, they pull you out of the race. And you also have to hit the checkpoints by a certain period of time, because if you fall behind, they pull you off. And talk about depressing. Imagine you've gone 75 miles.
So you can't just walk this thing.
No, you got to be within a time frame or they yank you off the trail. They don't want to go drag a bunch of bodies out for the next 2 days, I guess.
This sounds like the opposite of the running race that I am now most familiar with, which is the Santa Cruz Wharf to Wharf. So there's a wharf in downtown Santa Cruz, and the next town over, as you know, is Capitola, and there's a wharf there. And I think it's about a 10K, if I'm not mistaken. I've run it. I ran it once eons ago, but yeah, there's none of any of that. What there mostly is people wearing funny costumes and like the Rock and Roll Marathon, every band in Santa Cruz comes out and plays at 7 a.m. that morning.
Yeah.
And it sort of turns into a parade is what ends up happening. And, people wearing pink tutus and I don't know, it's,
yeah.
Wackadoo never takes a day off here. So it's not as tightly run as it sounds like your 100-miler was.
Yeah. At 10K, you don't have to worry about chafing.
But how do you, when you're running these things, yeah, exactly. Although, you could still no, I'm not going to talk about that. How do you determine the difference between my body's in pain and I can actually run through this mind over matter? My body's capable of a lot more than I normally think it is, which I understand. And the oh fuck, I'm permanently injuring myself because of something's going on? How do you tell the difference between those things?
I think it's a smart question. And I mean, I think it comes down to a certain self-awareness, and that self-awareness is generated through experience. So, I don't want to give the impression I'd never run a trail run before. I've done a lot of trail running of 10 miles and less. And just being aware and listening to my body is something that I think is important, and I try and do. So I think there's a self-awareness there, and there's a certain amount of experience and knowledge. There's a base level that I think you have to have so that you know the difference. But I always fall back on, Christopher, the idea that that the little voices in my head are, there's multiple voices, and I've got to be careful to which ones I listen to. And that's why I'm always trying to find that equilibrium where pain and injury are very different things.
Yeah, because I enjoy running, but as you well know, I have the furthest thing from a runner's body. And I think, I don't know, I'm no expert. What the fuck do I know? But my sense is the sports that we are good at or not good at have something to do with, obviously, our size and our body type and so forth and so on. It's very clear it makes a huge difference. And I have found over my life, it's fascinating to see, particularly now as I look back on the physical activities and sports that I did well in and did not do well in, and why that was. And I got to tell you, it took me to, about 45 until I really, to your point on knowing your body, really understood my body and what was the difference between pain I could fight through or run through and pain that was like, oh, fuck, stop. And also what were the sports I really, my body is tuned to versus not tuned to.
Yeah. Something that you just reminded me of that, and I'm not an expert. I don't teach this stuff. But I think the word is biomechanics.
Yeah.
And one thing that I feel like I did right, or I do right still today, is by doing yoga and having kind of a holistic approach to how I take care of my body. I feel like part of why I've been able to run long distances is, and I think the simple word is, my form or my biomechanics are really solid. Because again, this is an novice understanding of all this, but I feel like injury happens because of imbalance. And I think that phrase, by the way, is a metaphor for life. But I think injury happens out of imbalance. And so that's why we joke about the yoga, but I think it's actually a big deal, so that my mechanics and my alignment are good enough to where, because if I'm out of alignment, it doesn't take 50 miles. It might take 5, and then all of a sudden something.
Yeah, if your hips aren't right, or something's off in your back, or you're pronating or depronating or fronating or whatever all that stuff's called. Yeah, I got to believe over 100 miles, a small pronation can be a big difference. I mean, for me, I ran my marathon. I kept running. I didn't recover properly. I wasn't doing very much yoga at the time. And I caused a permanent IT band injury that I enjoy to this day.
A gentle reminder.
It's like it's just the scars we pick up over time. They're memories of a good time that happened in the past. But you've done a 300 mile, is that right?
Yeah, I signed myself up for a solo adventure to run from Washington, D.C. to Cleveland. And it was all part of I look back and I think it was a prank.
Those are two strange places to run to and from.
Yeah, well, there was a reason.
Right now, a lot of people, I think, probably want to run from Washington, D.C.
But maybe not to Cleveland.
I don't know. I don't have anything against Cleveland. The Bay Area Warriors are going to crush them in the basketball, but other than that, I have nothing against them. And the Rock and Roll Museum, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is there.
That's true. And
that's actually a very cool place.
So my run from DC to Cleveland was actually part of an effort to generate awareness, or to get myself a speaking gig. A buddy of mine connected me with the EO chapter of Cleveland. It was EO or YPO, one of the two. And we pitched them on this.
What's EO?
Entrepreneurs Organization.
And YPO is young Presidents.
Or yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think they have some affiliation. So we pitch to them. We go, hey, I'm this guy and I'm a leadership trainer, Yahoo, and I'm gonna give a seminar for your chapter, but to make it worth hiring me, I'm gonna run to the seminar from DC to Cleveland. And I'm pretty sure they said okay to that just to see a guy attempt to run from DC to Cleveland. And so the goal was to go 400 miles in 9 days. And I made it 332 miles in 8.5 days. So on one hand, it was an epic failure. And on the other hand, who really cared, right?
So what did you just crash, or you couldn't finish? What happened?
I just couldn't get enough miles in every day to where we just kind of ran out of time. There got to a point where it was like, I had all sorts of things that weren't working for my body. And I needed to stop and actually start thinking about what we were going to do for this presentation the next day. So there was a point where we just had to call it.
Well, you can't be a legend without being a loser, and you still ran 200 and how many miles?
Yeah, 300 and 332 in 8.5 days.
332. Yeah, I love it. Hey, do you remember by chance a guy named Terry Fox? Does that name mean anything to you?
It doesn't mean anything. I feel like I've heard it before.
Yeah, I think most people outside of Canada don't know who he is. So in the late 90s, early 80s, he's an athletic young man, and he lost his leg to cancer. And he decided that he would run across Canada to raise money for cancer with a prosthetic leg on. Oh. And I'm just checking. I'm just looking right now. It said he was forced to end his quest 143 days and 5,373 kilometers, or 3,339 miles.
Wow.
Yeah, and ultimately he passed away, and he's just a treasure in Canada. And so whenever anybody is talking about sort of long distance sports, I'm always reminded of the spirit of Terry Fox.
Yeah. I love those stories. I love that.
Yeah. So let's talk about life a little bit. How does Jon Berghoff get to be Jon Berghoff?
Yeah. I started in Cupertino, California. That's where I grew up. I grew up in Cupertino. And what's interesting is, as a young kid, as a kid, you don't really know what's everything that's going on in your parents' world. My parents met working at Intel in the 70s. So they were both, products of Silicon Valley. And my parents growing up worked really hard, and they both worked full time. And I remember as a kid, one of the things I was really inspired by, and I didn't realize this until a few years ago when I was just reflecting on it, but I was able to sense that kind of pioneering spirit growing up in Silicon Valley. And I think one of the things you asked, how did I become who I am? One of the things that I really appreciate that I learned from my parents was not only the value of hard work, because I saw both of them work really hard to provide for our family, but also the willingness to take risk. And both of them, in their own way, were entrepreneurs. And as a little kid, I remember understanding that they were taking risks. And so that's something that I think planted a seed really early on. And, then I got into my own entrepreneurial journey when I was in high school and took kind of an unconventional path. Every college that I applied to rejected me. So I kind of had to create my own way.
I love that you shared with me in the past that I've always chosen the path of self-education. That is the greatest repositioning of I didn't go to college I've ever heard. I love that. Can I borrow that one, John? I've always chosen the path of self-education.
Please, yeah, take it.
I've chosen some other self paths as well.
Self-discovery,
self-medication, self-enjoyment, all kinds of self-help things. So what was it about school that didn't work for you, John?
Yeah, I think I think it was a couple things. My nature as a kid, I was like, if there's a spectrum of extroversion and introversion, I was like, I fell off the cliff on the other side of introversion. I was kind of afraid of my shadow for a period of time.
It's so funny to hear that, knowing you now. I mean, you spend all this time on stage, you're an incredible podcast guy, you're public speaker, you're in the world in a very, what looks like extroverted way.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some truth. I heard, I think it was Mike Dillard was at one of our events recently, and he made a comment. And as soon as he made it, I had one of those like moments where I felt like a puzzle piece of my whole life started to make sense. And his comment was, every business he's ever started, he eventually realized it was to solve one of his own problems. And, I feel like everything I've done in my life, if I look back in some way, is trying to solve the problems that I dealt with. And, I think, so I could blame it on anybody I want. I'll just blame it on myself. I think my learning style didn't match how teaching was done in high school. So it just, I
Have
think
you
I
ever
was
been
smart.
tested for any learning differences?
Yeah, I've been diagnosed in high school with ADHD and, whatever you want to call that. But
I think that's what they call it.
yeah. Yeah.
So your ADHD, do you have dyslexia or executive function or any other fun?
I might. You could diagnose me right now. I don't know.
Well, I had this crazy experience on Legends and Losers. We recently, we have an episode with the head of a school called the Marburn Academy. His name's Jamie. He's a wonderful guy. And the Marburn Academy is in the Midwest. And they're a wonderful school. And they teach kids with learning differences. From I think it's through kindergarten through high school. I don't know. It's definitely through high school. Mm-hmm. And they're an amazing organization. And during our dialogue, I'm asking Jamie, who runs the school, to kind of unpack for us, what are the learning differences that they deal with. And as that's going on, he's describing the three main ones, and they are, of course, dyslexia, ADHD, and he starts describing this thing called executive function disorder. And he's going through the list of what it is, and it's got a lot of like spatial shit and mechanical shit, and you can't find anything. And he's describing all the stuff, and literally while we're doing Legends and Losers, I'm going, holy fuck! There's a name for this other thing now. I didn't know that. I just thought, oh, that's just. And I know some people think this is a bad word now, but I refuse to accept it as such. That's just retardation. That's just my retardation. I'm just the guy who can't put together an IKEA thing, or doesn't know where his keys are and has a hard time parking the car. But it turns out that's a thing called executive function. I think they actually call that one a disorder.
You've got a name for it.
Anyway, so I'm getting diagnosed while we're having the discussion on Legends and Losers with Jamie. I almost peed myself laughing. And so, but you think it's maybe just the ADHD? It's not the other stuff?
It could. I mean, who knows? By the end of my lifetime, they might have a label for a lot of other things that I do. So I don't know.
Yeah. And how has ADHD given you an advantage in life?
Yeah, well, I think part of how I've responded to it, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, it's kind of it's either turned it into a strength, or it's caused me to develop strengths that have just neutralized it. Like right now, as you and I are talking, I'm standing. And the reason I'm standing is because it's easier for me to stay present and stay energized. I've learned for me personally, when I stand up, and I was doing yoga before the call. So I feel like I have discovered for myself that when I take a lot better care of my body, I'm drinking, cold pressed juice or eating whole foods or whatever that is. copious amounts of Jack Daniels, whatever it is. Yeah. It for me, it not only neutralizes the ADHD, but then I think helps me in a lot of other ways. And I have a mindfulness coach, and one of the things that she's taught me is,
what the fuck's a mindfulness coach? Sorry to interrupt you.
yeah, exactly.
What does that even mean? Does she help you find your keys?
She's an imaginary friend. It's a voice in my head. Her name's Juliana Ray. She's the real deal. She's a 20-year apprentice of a guy named Shinzen Young, who he created.
Now, wait a minute. Are you making this person up, or is this person a real person? Because if you're making them up, it sounds pretty fucking awesome for a made up friend.
Stay tuned. So Juliana is she's a real person. She's a real deal. She teaches me a form of mindfulness called unified mindfulness. And the beauty of it is it's something that can be practiced. It can be a living practice. So I can be practicing it right now while you and I are speaking. And it's really all about developing 3 different attention skills. And the 3 attention skills are, number 1, sensory clarity. So sensory clarity would be like, if you think back to the day before we had HD TV, remember we used to have antennas, rabbit ears on our TVs, and you had to actually deal with the clarity. Well, now they just keep improving the clarity, but sensory clarity is the ability I've learned to detect and distinguish my internal experience of the external world. So an example of that would be...
Hold on. Slow down here, handsome. What? Say what you just said again.
Yeah. So there's these 3 attention skills that my coach taught me about. And sensory clarity, let me give you an example. Sensory clarity is one of the 3 skills? Sensory clarity is one of them, yep. Equanimity is the other. Equanimity. So you like to surf, right? You like to surf. So what I was taught is that our internal experience, I'm not using the word emotion, because for some of us it's an emotion, which we would feel in the body. For some of us it's voices in our heads. For some of us it's images of things that we see that either serve us or distract us. But the point is, our sensory experience at any given moment, anyone listening to this or watching this, is either seeing, hearing, or feeling something, right? That's kind of an undeniable reality, I think. And so what I've learned is that at any given moment, I can get connected to what am I seeing, hearing, or feeling? And the thing for me personally, I'm not worried about what I'm seeing in the external world. I'm not worried about the noise I'm hearing over there. I'm worried about the visions in my head, or the voices in my head, or the feelings, the emotions, and those not empowering me. So what Juliana has taught me how to do is around those 3 ways that we sense the world to develop 3 specific attention skills. So sensory clarity is just the ability to realize, hey, the reason I'm stressed out right now, or it's the ability to notice that I feel some sort of emotion, and then I can now actually label, oh, you know what, that's like an anxiety or an overwhelm or anger. And now I can actually work with that emotion instead of avoiding it. I can do something productive with it. And one of the things she taught me is that the second attention skill is equanimity. She taught me that our internal experience of the world, whether it's an emotion or distractions in our heads, are kind of like waves, Christopher. Like a wave comes and goes. It doesn't just show up and then disappear. And so one of the things I've learned is that the sooner I can detect something going on inside of me, the sooner it might go away. Instead of it, I don't notice it until it's too late. And then my fear, my anxiety, or my anger has a grip on me and just takes over. So the second attention skill, equanimity, is the ability to experience our internal world, but to avoid the push and the pull that it might have on us. So I can allow an emotion to come in, or I can allow some little voices to start saying, hey, you better prepare for that meeting tomorrow, otherwise you're going to screw it all up. And I can actually just watch that voice, and then by watching it, it'll just go away. And then the third attention skill is concentration power, which is the most obvious one for most people. That's the ability to stay focused on whatever I deem to be the most important thing to stay focused on. And so by having a mindfulness practice, I am constantly building those 3 attention skills. And I could attribute a lot of great things in my life to seeing from an internal place all the way out to what's happening in my business, that helping me. And I think that a lot of that's helped my ADHD, I guess.
And when did you start practicing mindfulness?
Well, my first experience with any form of meditation was, I think it was about 12 or 13 years ago. but I was kind of on and off. It wasn't a regular thing. And then I was introduced to Juliana through a mutual friend about 3 years ago. And I hired her for this like immersion thing where we would talk on the phone 2-3 days a week. And she would actually, I would do my practice over the phone and she would listen. And then after 10 minutes, we would then talk about it. And then I'd go back into my practice. And the coolest part was I'd never managed my calendar very well. So it would be like, oh, we had a call scheduled. Sorry, I've got to be in the car. I'd rather be trail running. And she'd say, great, put me in your earphones and we're going to do a practice while you're driving or while you're on your trail run. And that was when I thought, okay, this is, of all the types of meditation, the unified mindfulness, I thought this works for me if I could do it anytime, anywhere.
That's interesting. My master sensei says the best fighter, the fighter that is most relaxed wins. The best fighter is the most relaxed fighter.
Yeah.
You know, so on the equanimity, I think about that, and it's like, how do you, on one hand, be completely relaxed, present in the moment, but on the other hand, be like sharp and fast and do what you need to do, right? Act or react in a split second at the same time. It's kind of an interesting paradox to play with. How can I be completely relaxed and yet completely ready to go in whatever domain?
Yeah. See, I think it's a both and, it's not an either or. And in fact, the way I look at it is if I have an emotion that's overtaken me at any given moment, I'm either going to be too slow to be able to react the way I've been trying to train myself to react, or I won't even do it because I'm overtaken by the voices in my head, the feelings in my body. So I look at it as a both and. If I could be at peace, then when I want that intuitive, primal, and if I've been training to be ready, I want to be able to do that quickly. They serve each other, I think.
Yeah. And so school doesn't work for you. And we figure that out along the way. How's high school for you?
Yeah, my junior year was, it was probably a lower point in my life. And I think it was a lower point because I had this convergence of events where like I was enjoying school less and less. Socially, I was struggling. Even physically, I was not in really great shape at that point in my life. So it was kind of like anything that could not work well was not working well. And then I had this turning point moment. Like you talk about your life before Bix and after Bix. Well, I had my life before Dan and after Dan. And Dan was a manager of mine when I stumbled across this opportunity to sell Cutco kitchen knives at people's homes. So that was like
I love this, right? Because like any of us who grew up with any kind of a sales background, I don't know how you could be in sales. I don't know if it's still true. Maybe you could tell me. Is it possible to be in sales and not listen to Zig Ziglar?
I don't know. I don't think so.
To this day, right?
Yeah.
And so I can remember listening to those Zig Ziglar tapes and stuff, and all his stories were about selling pots and pans to stay-at-home moms and shit. And I sort of forgot that, of course, that still happens.
Yeah.
So you're struggling in school at the junior year of high school, and is that where you find Cutco?
Yeah, I had a buddy of mine who was doing it. He actually came to my parents' house, and he and I knew each other for a number of years working together. And he came to my house. He sold my mom a set of knives, and I walk outside with him, and I'm like, okay, the only thing I want to know is how much money did he just make? And he goes, well, let me check. And he had to get out a calculator, and he's like, okay, well, I sold her this like $600 set of knives, and at his point in his career, he made a pretty hefty commission, and I can't remember the number, but he said, yeah, I think I just made in those 30 minutes about $300. And I thought, okay, I just watched him do this. And if he can do it, I've got to be able to do this. So I quit my job I had and I just went and signed up to sell knives. And part of the turning point for me, Christopher, was within the first couple of days going through training, I had seen that Dan, my manager and mentor, I had seen that he had done really well for himself. And at that point he was 30 years old. And he was in training talking to us about self-education. He was talking to us about how in life responds to deserve, not need or want. And that's why sales is such a great experience, because you can, if you figure it out, you can control your destiny. So as a 17-year-old young man who everything else is not working, I'm thinking, well, if this guy's right, this might be worth checking out. And
so at 17, you think, I'm going to sell knives door to door. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got to interrupt a little bit because I don't know if I shared this with you, but like I have a Cutco knife right here.
That's a K-bar knife. They're made at the Cutco factory. Look at that.
Are they? Where is the Cutco factory?
Olean, New York.
Yeah, you're right. It says K-bar. Of course, your inventory. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this knife. And you and I were together at the GoBundance event in Whistler.
Yeah.
And Mike and Timmy and David and the GoBundance guys sent me this Cutco knife. And I don't know if you could see that.
Oh, look at that.
On one side, it has the GoBundance logo. And on the other side, it says Chris Lochhead, legendary category creator. And this what I like about this knife here, I didn't realize Cutco, made all kinds of knives. So what did I know about Cutco? But like, this is a very like Navy SEAL Rambo-y kind of a knife.
That's kind of a manly knife.
Yeah. So what's the purpose of this knife?
See, I don't know anything about that knife. I could tell you about a paring knife or a tomato knife, but I didn't actually get to sell that.
You didn't sell the man knives or the woe man knives, as the case may be?
So I could make something up, but I wouldn't be doing justice to probably what that knife is really made for.
So tell me about Cutco. I mean, tell me about the company. Tell me about your experience. It's just a fascinating thing. A 17-year-old young man struggling in school says, fuck it. I'm going to go sell door-to-door knives because I just watched this guy make $300 selling my mom $600 worth of knives.
Yeah. Yeah. So Cutco is an incredible company. I mean, they're an amazing case study in culture. And even though they sell knives, really what they sell is opportunities to young people. And there's a lot of people.
What's the average age of a door-to-door Cutco salesperson?
It's probably 17, 18 or 19 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. It's an incredible story. And they've been doing it that way for 60 years. And what they teach you, it's not exactly door to door, depending on how you want to talk about it. They teach you to go sell to somebody. And then hopefully you do a good job building a relationship with that person. And then you ask them for the names and phone numbers of their friends. And in my case, I was mostly seeing housewives or moms. It was whoever did the cooking in the house, oftentimes couples together. And then if I did a good job getting them to trust me and like me, they'd give me names and phone numbers of their friends. And then I'd walk out the door. And
so you can literally, I just want to make sure I understand this. You can knock on someone's door, have them open that door, and have them welcome you into their home with a bunch of knives. I just want to unpack this. Have you hang out for some period of time? How long does a typical sales pitch take?
I mean, if I needed, it could be quick. And sometimes I'd be there for half a day if we became friends.
And sometimes you're out in what, an hour? Is an hour?
30 minutes, 45 minutes. Yeah.
With a sale?
Yeah. For me, it was a sale 6 or 7 out of 10 times. Yeah.
So 6 out of 7. So 6 out of 7 doors you knocked on, we're going to buy some knives.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And so what does it take to knock on somebody's door, have them let you in knowing full well that you have knives with you, and have them drop, several $100s on, I mean, the Cutco stuff is beautiful product, at least the stuff I've seen.
Yeah.
It's not cheapy shit, right?
Yeah.
And so how the fuck do you do that, John?
I did it like 1,200 times and some crazy things happened. So first of all,
what part of the country were you in at this point?
So I was in the Bay Area, and then later in my career, I was out in Northern Virginia.
In both cases, selling Cutco.
Yeah, and actually, I had a stint in Albuquerque, New Mexico, because
did. Okay.
For no reason at all, I wanted to live in Albuquerque for a summer. So
Just
I
'cause.
moved out there, and out there I did literally have to knock on doors to get things started. But the key is to succeed in that business, you don't want to be knocking on doors cold. The key is you do a good job to where you're getting a referral. So the trick is you have to learn how to make a phone call and get somebody on the phone to give you an appointment to come to their house and show you the knives, right? So there's a distinction there. So I had to,
So it wasn't door to door in that sense. It was telemarketing first.
you had to figure out how on the phone to get in. Nowadays, I think the reps like send text messages or something. For me, it was all phone calls. So I made a shit ton of phone calls. I made probably 40 to 50 phone calls, 2, 3, sometimes 4 nights a week for about 4 years straight. So I spent a lot of time on the phone. And I would do it all at once real quickly. And you had to turn it into a game to not go insane. But I would make these calls, turn it into appointments, get to their house, build rapport. I got really good as a 17, 18-year-old at figuring out how to connect with people in a meaningful way and then sell them my wares.
Now it can't hurt that you're so fucking handsome, right?
I don't know. It may
And
help.
when the 17-year-old version of you knocks on the door, the average, stay-at-home mom or dad, for that matter, is going to, oh, look at this cute young man at my door, right?
It may not have hurt.
Now, you went on to set incredible records at Cutco.
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
And so my understanding is you're the number one sales rep in company history.
Yeah. At the time that I was a rep, I think I broke, they track all these different records, of course.
Of course.
It's another way to motivate.
These things matter. Yeah.
Any record they track is one more way to motivate all the sales reps.
Of course.
So I broke dozens of records. But at one point I held the record for the biggest week, the biggest month, the biggest year. And I did really well. Yeah. At the time I was the youngest. I think I'm still the youngest and fastest to make it to what they call their Hall of Fame. A lot of my records, obviously 20 years since then, have been broken, but it was a great experience. It was hard work.
But didn't you become the number one rep of all time?
Yeah. At the point when I left the company, out of
You were
over
the
a
number
million.
one sale. So 1 million people
Yeah.
had sold Cutco.
That's right. Yeah.
And out of the 1 million people who sold Cutco, you were the number one salesperson.
Yeah, that's right.
So I would like to know how many salespeople in their field can say, I was number one out of 1 million people who did the same thing I did. I love it. And is that what leads to vitamins? How do we go from knives to Vitamix?
Yeah, it eventually did. Yeah, it eventually did. I eventually left Cutco just to go, do something else. I didn't have any big reason other than let me see what else I could do. And so I started a coaching business, and I didn't know anything about coaching.
Sales coaching business?
Yeah, sales coaching. And I didn't know anything about coaching, but I could sell. So I had a full book of business really quickly. And then I thought, oh shit, I've got to learn how to coach these people that I just convinced I could coach them. And I figured that out and did that for about 5-6 years. And the cool thing about the coaching business was I started with salespeople because that's what I knew. But then what happened is I got good at coaching salespeople. So all of a sudden their managers started hiring me. So all of a sudden now I'm coaching, the office managers. And then I figured out how to get decent at coaching them. So now the division managers are hiring me because, they're like, well, my guys are paying you. Can you tell me what you're doing? And it worked all the way up until I was coaching senior executives. And so Vitamix was kind of at the tail end of my coaching business career. They were a client of mine where I was hired to coach all of their senior regional managers for the US.
And they are a multi-level marketing vitamin company, are they not?
No.
What
Vitamix makes the blenders. Vitamix makes
the blenders.
The blenders, yeah.
Oh, Vitamix.
Yeah,
such
Vitamix.
a retard. I thought vitamins.
They're an
need
iconic
some
brand.
vitamins.
They're a category king. It was
I'm just a moron. That's No, I got.
No,
I
you have
got it.
executive. What's your disorder?
I have executive. I have, you name it, I have. It's called It's Very Hard Living With Me. That's what I have.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the blenders and shit.
Yeah, so Vitamix Corporation. Yeah, they're an iconic brand. And they were a client of mine. And they, after about 1.5 years of working with them, for them, they convinced me to jump on board and to head their sales team, which I got to tell you, that experience and that opportunity, I can also say I have my life before and after Vitamix, because that opportunity that they gave me to work for an incredible company that while I was there, I got to live what it was to work with a category king creator.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an experience I could have paid for. It was amazing.
Well, and how is it that at I think you tell me if I'm misremembering this, at the ripe old age of 27, you were the head of sales of this company with how many salespeople?
Yeah, when I got there were 175 salespeople, and I had 7 managers. And when I left about 3.5 years later, we had 600 salespeople and about 25 managers.
Son of a beach. So at plus or minus 30, you're running a sales organization with 600 people in it. And it's like, this is guerrilla sales shit too. This isn't like, right?
Yeah.
You got to make your shit happen here. This is not like, with no disrespect. This is not like, selling iPhones where they just sort of roll out the door, right? You gotta make this shit move.
Yeah. Well, it's both. It's both. So we had the best product in the category. In many ways, we created the category of premium blending. So like you teach and play bigger, and through this podcast, you've got to have product, you've got to have company, and you got to really own the category. Yeah. So we had those things going for us, but we had to do things right to really capture the growth that we ended up capturing. It was an amazing journey. And
so you could have easily stayed on the trajectory of being an executive, but interestingly, you decide not to do that.
Yeah, I left. I left. I mean, a week later, I had just been promoted and honored and awarded, and but I left because I felt a calling to figure out how to help other organizations to experience some piece of what I had experienced at Vitamix. And actually, it was what's kind of wild how the world works is my second day on the job at Vitamix, I got called into a meeting where I met a professor who they had hired. His name was Dr. David Cooperrider. And when I got called in at the time, I didn't know who David was from anybody. And David, this is my second day on the job, he introduces this philosophy of his. It's a philosophy, but it's also an approach or a set of human technologies that he had been using and had been used all around the world called appreciative inquiry. And I still can barely say those 2 words, but I'm listening to him talk about this. And he's talking about how he would call it a human system. A human system, what's that? Any team or organization or community, a city, a whole society. He talked about how, the world is calling for new ways of leading teams into the future. So Christopher, what was cool is second day on the job, I met this guy and I'm introduced to his methodology and his philosophy. And that philosophy guided a lot of what I did while I was at Vitamix. And it also,
the Cooperrider shit, appreciative inquiry, is part of what allowed you to go from 175 to 600 in terms of number of salespeople, and allowed you as a young man to scale as an executive and as a sales leader. Is that how I should think about it?
It allowed us to do it in a way where we not only grew the business, but the people that were a part of our team were fulfilled and engaged and connected to a sense of purpose. And it was the same reason I left, because I thought if I could figure out how to take this methodology, I mean, it's a 35-year-old technology, but the reason why everyone in the world doesn't know about it is because the world wasn't ready for it. But I left Vitamix because I felt like, you know what, there's so many signals.
What do you mean the world wasn't ready for it? What does that mean?
Well, if we look at the history of how people have been taught to manage and lead, the concept of commanding and controlling, or the concept that I, as the manager or leader, am supposed to have the answers, or the idea that the reason to work is to make money and, I'll find purpose in the latter third of my life. Those philosophies don't match up with what the workforce wants today. And they also, let's just look at the results. Let's look at the data. 7 out of 10 people don't like going to work. So what else do you need to know that we're due for a new way of how we manage and lead?
And look at our world, right? We're overweight. We're on all these fucking happy pills, and yeah, most Americans hate what they do, or certainly don't love what they do for a living. And I've always thought this conversation of even work-life balance is an ineffective way of looking at things, right? Because
you can't separate them.
Well, yeah. And so when you say, context matters, right? Because languaging creates thinking, and thinking creates ultimately actions. And so when you say, work-life balance, it denotes a context of my life is here and my work is there, and they're not the same thing. And so I need to balance how much work I'm doing so I can't, so I have some kind of a life. That's at least in my interpretation, unspoken when somebody says, how do you manage your work-life balance, Jimmy? And I reject the whole paradigm.
Yeah.
I think it's the wrong conversation. I think the right conversation is, how do you build a legendary life, and how do you build a legendary career that serves what you're up to in your life?
Yeah, one of my favorite answers to that question of balance, I had a chance to meet with years ago a guy by the name of Ivan Misner, Dr. Ivan Misner, and he founded what is now often quoted as the largest small business networking organization in the world, which is known as BNI. And Dr. Misner, I'm in a meeting with him, and somebody asked him the question, how do you get it all done? Because he had just published all these books. He was a dad. And he corrected their question, because their question was about work-life balance. And he said, if you followed me around, you might be disappointed that, there is no balance the way everybody would think there is. But what he did is he reframed it, Christopher, and I'll always remember his answer. He said, I don't strive for balance. I strive for harmony. I strive to find a way to make it all so it works together, but where I'm not thriving in one area and at the expense of every other area. And it doesn't mean that my kids are always getting all the attention that my work gets. But his point was, I'm careful to make sure that I'm not trying to thrive in one and it's costing me everywhere else. And so he said, harmony is what I strive for, which I like that better.
Well, and what I would say is harmony over time, because legendary people are imbalanced.
Intentionally at times, yeah.
Well, yeah, right? Like, you don't get to be Steph Curry without shooting a lot of fucking hoops.
Yeah.
Right. And so he's imbalanced in the context of, I bet you his tennis game sucks.
Yeah. That's
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right. And like, I've just had this in my life. We started Legends and Losers in February 2017. And for the first 3 months, my life is, if you have this stupid context around work-life balance that drives me nuts, what you'd say is, my life has been imbalanced. But it's not been imbalanced. I have this exciting new project. I'm incredibly turned on by it, and it's a lot like a startup. And so I'm going to go do that, and I'm going to focus on that. And the other things in my life that I love are going to take a backseat for a while, and then we're going to find a new equilibrium, a new normal. And I just don't know any other way. I mean, when I was CMO, I worked 80 hours a week, and there's just no way I know how to do that job and not do that.
Yeah. Yep.
Now you could call that imbalance, but it's what I wanted to be doing with my life at the time.
It's your passion.
Yeah. And so if you're lucky, you get lost in your passion.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. That's called winning. And we go, you're out of balance. No, I won. I'm out of balance. I'm not out of balance. I'm focused.
Yeah.
I'm committed.
Yeah. And I think for me, Chris, a big learning since my wife and I started having kids. So we have 3 kids. We have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And one of the things that's done is it's caused me to stop and say, okay, what does winning actually look like in my life? And what does winning look like in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, which is all another way of saying, what do I value? And how do I make sure that I'm just conscious of what I value. Because it doesn't mean my kids get, these more time, but I do make sure that when they do get my time, it's quality time.
But so let's unpack this one a little bit. So
Yeah.
I mean, you start Flourishing Leadership, what, about 2 years ago?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So at the time,
I
your
left
kids
all
are,
the cushy jobs, and
but at the time your kids are 5,
3 and
3
1.
and
Yeah.
1. So tell me about that. I mean, we I talk a lot about the crisis in American entrepreneurship and how millennials are on track to be the least entrepreneurial in a generation, and how, according to MIT, more companies die in our country every week than are founded. And every time I say that, I go, "What the fuck? How can that be true?" And so you are definitely a younger entrepreneur, uh, and you had a very young, flourishing family when you decided to start Flourishing Leadership. And so when you say, "Hey, I'm going to leave this VP of sales job where I run a sales organization of 600 people, and I gotta believe they're paying you a couple of bucks to do that," and you say to your gal, "Baby, I'm going to go start this leadership training company." Walk me through that, Jon.
Yeah, well, and this is where I'm the luckiest guy I know, because my wife, I couldn't have a more understanding wife than my wife, Mara. She appreciates and understands how important it is for me to make sure that I'm following what I think is my highest and best use on this planet. And so that's step one. And I could argue nothing else matters. If I didn't have her support, this stuff doesn't work. But I had her support, and it actually goes back to that same point that for me personally, I think the best thing I can do, not just as an entrepreneur, not just as a leader, not just as a teacher, but as a dad, is to make sure that I am continuously, in a never-ending way, asking the question, how do I align my strengths with the biggest opportunities to make a difference in the world? Because I think in the long run, even if there's stress in the short run, I think in the long run, I'll be more fulfilled. I'll be setting the example I want to set for my kids. And I think the business will work if I know what I value, if I know what I'm good at, and I keep the mission bigger than my ego. I think everything can work.
So let's talk about Flourishing Leadership. You do some amazing things with companies and with organizations of different types, and with groups and events, and having participated in some of that with you, I've gotten to experience a taste of it. So tell me all about that.
Yeah. So the simplest way of explaining what we do is we change the results of an organization or a community or a team of any size or type by changing the conversations that they're having. And the way we do that is we professionally design questions that are going to lead to the conversations that are going to change the stories they're telling themselves and each other, that eventually are going to change their results. So at the end of the day, I spend most of my working hours literally designing questions. Is the methodology that we use, that we believe in, it's called appreciative inquiry. And in a nutshell, it's based on the premise that if I look back 100 years, and I look at how the big four consulting firms work, and I look at how we're wired as human beings, and I look at the part of our brains that have been around for a lot longer than the newer part of our brains, we as human beings, we as businesses and organizations are wired to look for what's wrong. We're wired to look for what's missing, what's broken, what's not working. I saw one of my kids' report cards the other day, and what do you think I looked at? I'd skipped all the good grades and looked at his bad grades. And surveys have showed every other parent does the same thing. It's the reason the news gives us the bad, not the good. That's how they sell their ads. And so appreciative inquiry is a response to realizing we're moving into a time where if 7 out of 10 people don't like going to work, maybe we need a new paradigm for how we approach work. So instead of a business being a problem to be solved, what if a group of people is a collection of strengths to be unlocked? so the appreciative inquiry approach is based on several premises. And one of those premises is, instead of showing up to work as a team or an organization or a community and saying what's wrong or what's missing or what's broken and how do we fix that, instead we ask, well, when have we been at our very best? What did that look like? What were we doing? And how can we do even more of that? Or a question like, no matter how we evolve as an organization, what do we love about who we are today? And how do we make sure we continue to build on and from what we are good at? Or a question like, when we look into the future, what kind of images of our future collectively cause us to come alive, get us excited, are big enough that each of us individually can be excited about it? So we design questions and then have groups of people have guided dialogues based on those questions. And it eventually leads to large groups coming up with strategic plans, solving a problem, designing a product or a solution, improving their culture, sharing wisdom across functions or across a team. And that's what we do in a nutshell.
And, I'm reminded a lot, John, of Bix and our dialogue with Bix on Legends and Losers.
It was amazing.
Thank you so much. I mean, he's Bix Bixen.
Period.
Yeah, exactly. He could have been talking to a door. But one of the interesting things he talked about when he was on Legends and Losers, and I've thought about a lot since then, is how do you pierce through the apathy? Because when you say what you just said, I hear it in my own head. I'm sure other people do as well, which is, here's some more mamby-pamby.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like some left coast, airy-fairy, bullshitty, HR, offsitey, kumbaya, hold each other's hands. Let me close my eyes while I fall backwards and you catch me. And all the other bullshit, Dilbert office, management, leadership, training, horror shows we've all, been to. And so, so there's apathy about that. But I think the much bigger apathy is an apathy around, that's just the way it is around here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? That, yeah, great. Do my best work every day. It's just not going to happen, John. You don't get it. This is a political place. My boss is an asshole. I'm underpaid. We have shitty technology. There's all the stuff that people experience at work that leads to an apathetic point of view. And in particular, what always drove me the craziest when I was an executive was indirect and sometimes even duplicitous communication, that people weren't straight. The politics of being in any kind of organization, that people never tell you what they really think and so forth. And so when you say what you just said, there's sort of two sets of apathy that pop up for me. There's the apathy around, another dumb Dilbert-esque thing, management training. But the bigger apathy is appreciative inquiry. What are you talking about? Like, nobody appreciates anybody around here. This place is a fucking sweatshop, right? There's the apathy around work and some of the things that go on for some of us at work. So help me with how you pierce through that, because I know it's a big thing that Bix works on as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the things that Bix said that I fully agree with and practice as much as I can remember to is, when he walks into an organization, the last thing people want to hear is that I'm some guy who's coming in to fix them, right? That I understand who they are and I've got some solution that's going to fix them. Nobody wants to be fixed. And so one of the beautiful things about our approach is I'm able, or our team is able to walk in the door and we're able to tell people right away, we're not here with any answers. We don't have the answers. We're only here based on the premise that whatever your biggest problems are, you have the answers to, right? So for one, we remove this idea that we have these answers that they need, because we believe we have a process that allows them to come up with far better answers than if we tried to deliver them. Now, that's not going to solve everything you just mentioned. I said a few minutes ago, the world is not ready or hasn't been ready for an approach like ours. That's another way of saying there's a lot of businesses that still aren't ready. And I could tell you right now, here's where our approach doesn't work. It doesn't work if the leadership themselves aren't ready and willing to trust in the wisdom of their people, right? So where we're really brought in is when the leaders at the highest level have finally come to this realization that they don't have all the answers and that their people probably have better answers than they do. And they're finally willing to trust in the wisdom of their people. Because our approach by default, people immediately realize our approach puts the power and it puts responsibility into people's hands. But it doesn't work if the leaders aren't willing to give people that power and that responsibility. So, and that's the last thing I'll say is people have to eventually realize that, they have to realize that the ownership lies within them. Once they're willing to move away from being a victim to being a player, we've got a method that they can be a player with. But if the leaders and the culture want to keep playing the victim card, our approach, I don't think any approach is really going to make any difference.
And so if I wanted to embark on appreciative inquiry in my organization, what would be the things I would be thinking about and working on?
Well, the first question I would ask you is, what do you want more of in your organization? What do you want? Do you have, and it's fine for us to frame it as a problem, right? It's fine to talk about problems. We don't ignore problems. But what we do is we give people a whole new way of framing the problem. So it's not uncommon, Christopher, where I will walk in and sit with a CEO and I'll say, what do you want? And they're either going to answer that one of two ways. They're either going to answer it by saying, I want more of blank or I want less of blank. They're either going to answer it by saying, I want to move towards something or away from something. If they answer, I want to move away from something, I'll give you a classical case study that's used in the appreciative inquiry world all the time. There was an AI team, appreciative inquiry team, that went in to work with British Airways. And the team at British Airways said, well, the problem, what we need to work on, we don't need any of your positive mumbo jumbo. We need to fix our problem of lost baggage. And the appreciative inquiry consultants explained something to British Airways. They said, well, you have to understand that if that's the lens that we choose to work through, what we're going to do is we're going to probably become really smart about the problem, and we might become really smart about some solutions. But where we're going to end up, if we frame this whole thing through, I just want less of this, think about we're just fixing the problem, but that does not mean we're going to go far beyond that towards excellence. And so that team, the British Airways team, went back and they put their heads together and they said, okay, how do we reframe this? And it was like a light bulb. They got it. They said, okay, we want the focus of this inquiry. We want the focus of this engagement, not to be fixing our lost baggage problem, but it's a new question. And the new question is, how do we create an exceptional arrival experience? And by taking the problem and reframing it towards what we want to move towards, Christopher, the idea is the kinds of answers that we're going to come up with are going to go so far beyond just the baggage problem. So when we walk in the door, someone might say, I got a problem with marketing or culture or operations. And we say, great. And then we reframe it. And we immediately want to start asking the question, well, what would it look like for us to be exceptional in that area? And then we'll bring everyone they're willing to put into the room, because a big premise of our philosophy, and this is why some leaders aren't ready for this. This is not going to work if a leader's not willing to do this, is we believe there's a power in wholeness. In wholeness, meaning I can't solve a problem without having as many relevant voices in the room when we're having that discussion. Because we've all been in organizations where we have a meeting and everyone says, well, this is great, but the marketing department wasn't in the room, or the sales department wasn't in the room, or the accounting department wasn't in the room. And really, it's the people in the room are not the ones saying that. It's the ones not in the room who are saying, well, they just came up with that solution, but none of us were there. So before we even see the solution, we're not going to buy into it. We see that all the time. So part of what we do is we say, look, if you're going to work with us, you've got to be willing to put the accountant, the operations person, the factory line worker, your salesperson, your janitor, and your CEO to sit at the same table, because every one of those voices brings wholeness to the story that they're telling. So it's about questions. It's about inclusivity in those conversations. And ultimately we move people through a process or a series of questions where we start from, when have you been at your best? Where are you at your best? What could the future look like? And what do we want to do now to bring the best into that future?
And so it's really about framing the questions to have the conversations that are going to yield a different result than the questions and conversations we're having today. Is that how I should think about it?
Yeah, the best way I like to explain this is to think about a question as like a lens. So I'm wearing contact lenses right now. And anyone who's ever put on glasses or contacts, the moment that I put these contacts in, I not only do I not look at the lens, it's not even possible. I unconsciously look through the lens, and that lens changes how I see the world. And when we ask a new question, if I walk into a meeting and we unconsciously all ask the question, how messed up is this? What happens is we just put on a lens, and all we're going to do is see how messed up. We're going to get really smart about how messed up things are. But if we put on the lens, if we're able to switch the lens out and say, okay, well, when have we actually been good at this? And let's say an organization says to me, John, we've never been good at this. So how's your method going to work? I said, well, has anyone in the world ever been good at this thing that you want to be good at? Because we can bring wisdom from outside into the dialogue. But when we change that lens to where has it been excellent? What does it look like either in or outside of our organization to be excellent? People all of a sudden have brilliance to bring to that conversation. And Christopher, the biggest byproduct of these conversations is even if someone's hesitant or skeptical when we walk in the door, what we notice is that if they do it the old way, where they talk about what's not working, what's wrong, or what's broken, which we're all really good at, if you actually watch human beings having those conversations, you'll see the energy get sapped out of the room. If you watch people talking about when we were at our best, when we are at our best, or what it could look like to be at our best, you can literally viscerally see and feel energy coming into the room. And people are coming alive, and we see it again and again.
I love it, John. And my hope, Peter Drucker so many years ago said, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And I've, talked about this a little bit because it's been such a big story. But the United Airlines, situation where they dragged the guy off the plane. And my favorite part of that whole thing is the fact that immediately Munoz, the CEO, says the problem is a training and a procedure and a policy problem.
Mm-hmm.
And while I have no doubt that United has some shitty policies and some bad training, their problem is they are a rotten at the core culture company. And how I know that is I'm a customer and they treat me like shit. And I used to travel a lot and they always treated me like shit. And their employees generally aren't that happy. And so it's no surprise to me that it was United Airlines. It absolutely is no surprise. And it's, you don't see that happen on Virgin. And so I guess my point is, I just love how a CEO of a Fortune 500 company can think it's a policy problem and a training problem, when in point of fact, it's a culture and a core values problem, because you shouldn't have to put in a fucking training program or a manual somewhere. Don't beat the shit out of paying customers.
And I think at the end of the day, that problem doesn't get solved until that CEO and his or her team members are willing to say, this is my problem. This isn't going to change until we change.
Well, and the interesting thing, we had General Stanley McChrystal on Legends and Losers. And one of the amazing things he talks about is how do you, when you're in Afghanistan, by way of example, or Iraq, and you're training Iraqis or Afghanis, and you've now got to train them and get them up to speed and then work with them shoulder to shoulder. There's like a lot of things you don't get to train them in the specifics of, right? And you have to be able to create an environment where these two cultures can come together and work together where they don't even speak the same language. And to me, that starts with everything you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That when the values are in place and when people have gotten clear about the mission and we're asking the right questions, and therefore we are purposely developing the lenses that we think are the most powerful lenses. That's powerful. What drives me crazy is we use lenses in our world and in our culture that get thrust upon us by others, and we don't question them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so just if you think about some of the language that we use, you hear it all the time, in just casual language with people. How are you? Not too bad. The other one that drives me crazy is, how's life treating you?
Yeah.
Well, the context is there's this thing called life out there, and
it's out of my control.
It's out of my control, and it might treat me well, and it might treat me bad. It's sort of like the weather. It's like sort of saying, well, has it been raining in Cleveland? Right. And it's like, well, it's not how life's like I reject the whole paradigm. It's the wrong conversation.
Yeah.
And those are small examples, but we accept those. I'll give you one in business. Well, what's our go-to-market strategy? What's our go-to-market plan? There's this phrase, go to market. And in some cases, companies do go to market. But it presupposes that there's a market, and what there is for us to do is we have to go to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in category design, we say, well, how do we design a market category? And then how do we get the world or the market to come to us? Right? To your point, it's a different conversation. When you say, well, how do we need to work on our go-to-market plan strategy? Mm-hmm. Very different than how do we frame a dialogue in a particular area that causes the world to see a problem and a solution in the way we do, because we think if they do, first of all, we think that's the powerful way to look at it. And second of all, if the world does, but boom, a new category will appear, and we have an opportunity to become a category king and win. It's a very different framing of it than how do we go to market.
Yeah. A good example of what you're talking about, Christopher, you mentioned culture, and you also mentioned the idea that we're often living in somebody else's story if we're not aware of it.
Those are Bix's words, by the way, but attributing to me is awesome.
I think your point is we'll take somebody else's lens, which to me is the same thing as living in someone else's story.
Absolutely. Everything we think, we've been conditioned to think.
Yeah. And
the powerful people, and this is why I love what you do, they think about what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Why do I think that? Why do I behave that way? Who taught me that? Do I agree with that? One of my favorite quotes is, if you haven't changed your mind lately, how do you know you have one?
Well, and I think our great challenge with changing a culture, right? It's a lot easier to talk about this than to do it, is because culture is kind of like gravity. You get to a point where enough people are having unconscious dialogues. And like that sentence that you said a minute ago, how's life treating you? That's exactly what somebody would say to someone as they walk into work. When people ask us the question, how can you figure out the culture of an organization? We don't have to go to their website. We don't look at what they've written. We don't look at what the CEO says. We stand at the water cooler and you listen to the conversations that people are having. And when there's enough unconscious dialogues where people are talking as though they don't have any control over their world, that's a challenge. And so that's part of why when we come in, we say, hey, we're not going to have a meeting with 4 executives and then you go make some changes. We say, no, you're going to put the whole company in the room. So we facilitate 100, 200, 500 person dialogues, because I haven't figured out any other way to know for a fact that everybody is actually having the same conversation. And so that becomes a tipping point where they've all had a shared experience of a type of dialogue. And now the probability, it's not guaranteed, but the probability that they can be more conscious about their dialogues leaving that experience or continuously is increased.
And so consciousness about language, dialogue, and thinking, and in particular, questions that yield meaningful breakthroughs in results. That's what sits at the core of this work, does it not?
That's exactly right. It's new questions that lead to new conversations that change our context and our story, which is eventually going to change our results.
And a demarcation point in thinking, a demarcation point in language creates a demarcation point in thinking, and a demarcation point in thinking creates a demarcation point in action and therefore results. And so that's a fancy way of saying fucking languaging matters, right?
It sure does. It sure does. I'll give you a great example of this. I'm working with one of our certification participants a few weeks ago, and he's about to run a meeting for some salespeople. And we're talking about designing questions that lead to meaningful dialogues. And so he shows me one of the questions that he's going to ask the group. And the question he's going to ask them is, what is it that you love about this job? And I share, as soon as I saw it, I could see into the future. Literally, I could see exactly the conversations this is going to lead to. And I said to this member of our training, I said, if you ask this, you and I both know what these salespeople are going to say they love about this job is that the answers are going to start to tilt towards very superficial things. They love the travel, the freedom, and maybe some of them will talk about the difference they make. But we knew that based on the culture he was going into, the answers were going to be very superficial, materialistic. And so I gave him an example. I said, if you just change it from, hey, I'm going to tell a story that exemplifies why I love this job, to why don't you have them tell a story or talk about what is it about this job, what is it about this job that gives them the greatest sense of meaning, fulfillment, or purpose? And I said, just by inserting one of those three words, you're going to get a completely different conversation. Instead of talking about the trips and all the bullshit that you give them and the money, just by changing it from why do you love this job to what about it gives you a sense of meaning, fulfillment, and purpose, they're now going to talk about the impact that they make on their customers. They're going to talk about the impact that it makes on their families that they get to provide for, just by adding the word purpose or meaning into the question that's going to guide their dialogues.
Yeah, it's interesting, living so close to Silicon Valley and having lived in Silicon Valley and sort of see over time how companies have become amusement parks, they're physical locations. I don't know if have you been to Facebook's headquarters?
I've heard it's like Disneyland. Yeah.
It literally is like Disneyland insofar as there is a manufactured street, Main Street USA type thing going on, and different buildings, and they have restaurants and a dry cleaner, and you can get free nut tickling anytime you want, and like all this stuff. and it's, on one hand, I love it because it's like, wow, we've come a long way in terms of corporations valuing employees, and so that part is very, very cool. The part that I find a little bit of a bummer, though, is, do we really have to go that far and turn our work environment into an amusement park to get people to be loyal and do a great job and apply themselves and really do their best work? And I think it's gone too far over onto that Disneyland paradigm, which is, the work should turn them on. And it's, yes, create a great environment. And if you want to give your employees free food and you want to have a, massage booth and a carpentry playpen and all this other stuff they have that is unbelievable, then, I guess. But when I saw it, I guess my point in all that, John, is I thought, are people apt to lose track of the raison d'etre for their work when they're surrounded by a work environment that's, koosh balls and carpentry and nut tickling?
Well, here's where I think that works, and here's where I think it goes wrong. and it's not guaranteed either way. It's about how it's framed. I think where it works is, I think we know a lot today that we've never known about unlocking creativity and innovation. And I think we know that play, as an example, is actually a smart thing to have in the workplace. So that's where that works. Here's where it doesn't work. Where it doesn't work is when management or senior leadership or whoever it is that installed the water slides and the basketball hoops, if they are expecting that to serve as engaging our employees, right? If ping pong,
yes, thank you.
yeah, if ping pong tables and happy hours are my answer to how I engage people, I will lose my best people, right? And in a knowledge economy, that's the only competitive advantage anybody has is your best people. And so what we like to say is that what we love about the work we do is whether or not you've got those ping pong tables, we are giving you a method where in real time you can engage everybody in a meaningful way around the business. So that's when it's a problem.
And so in that context, would you say appreciative inquiry is a management discipline or what would you call it?
We're trying to figure that out. We need help.
Maybe we should do some category design work on that.
Yeah. So it's two things. One is it's a philosophy that anybody can adopt. Anybody at any moment can choose to think about what they're thinking about, as you said earlier, right? But it's also a set of approaches, and it's a fantastic tool for any manager. My highest hope would be that there becomes a day in the future where appreciative inquiry is an operating system the same way, Microsoft was to the PC was. And I would love for there to be a day where there's not a manager on the planet who's about to walk into a meeting that they're running where they haven't spent some amount of time, not just thinking, what am I going to say, but what are the questions that I want to present to the group? What do I want to ask? So that we have a collective dialogue that is intentionally designed to move us towards something positive.
Yeah. And I got to ask you this question. I feel like I now, live in a world where I get something awesome from one of you guys like every week. So I've had the pleasure of getting to know a bunch of you guys who are all trained in this stuff, right? And I'm curious. Like I have my F-bomb with me.
Well, I've never actually seen that.
You haven't actually seen this thing? Oh, this is the greatest. This is the greatest fucking thing. So for those of you who are not watching on YouTube, this is what looks like. It's heavy too. What is this? It must be.
It's like cement.
Yeah, I'm guessing. I mean, it's a heavy ass paperweight, and it's in the shape of sort of a Bugs Bunny style bomb. And then there's a big letter F in small case on the front of it. And so I can't remember why you sent this to me, what you were supposedly thanking me for.
Does it need an explanation?
Well, it needs no explanation. That's for damn sure. And then, of course, you gave Colin and I these incredible headphones. And your friend and now my friend, Scott Lowry, I mean, he blew me away with a gift that is beyond comprehension. I mean, very few times in my business career has somebody I had a business relationship with done what he did. What he did was after our visit, he said, I want to get Lochhead a surfboard.
Yeah.
But not any surfboard. So he goes out and he gets a custom designed Robert August surfboard. And Robert August is a legend. I mean, literally a legend in the surf world. He communicates with Robert because Scott doesn't know shit about surfing, right? So he's got to explain to Robert in whatever terms he can, like where I live and what kind of surfing I do and whatever. Because surfboards are not they're not like skis even. They're very, very, they're personal in a way that's hard to describe. Anyway, so the net of it is he gets this incredible surfboard that is perfectly tailored to kind of where I surf and the kind of surfing I do. And he gets the Legends and Losers logo on it and all this. It's incredible. So all that is leading to a question, which is all you appreciative inquiry guys are so fucking nice. And you send all these nice things all the time. And is that part of it? Where did you guys all get to be so fucking nice?
Yeah, I got to think about that.
Or sweet, like you send sweet things, and my experience of guys is we don't really do that.
Yeah,
at all. Like guys don't send you sweet little gifts in the mail and shit, and they sure don't get you custom surfboards.
So,
it's extraordinary. You guys have a sense for, does this go back to your sensory stuff, or you guys have a sense for doing things to connect with people in a way that seems very unique? And I've been on the receiving end of it for a little while now. And it's like, okay, these dudes are different. What is that?
yeah, I think it's maybe two things. One of them is we all have a mutual friend, a guy by the name of John Rulin, who published a book recently that's been a big hit, and it's called Giftology. And John's been a friend of mine for 18 years. And one of the things that he and I have been passionate about for a long time is finding meaningful ways to appreciate people in our lives. So like the headphones you're wearing, like the reason I sent you those headphones, is it a gift? Sure. But the other reason I sent you those is because it's one way of communicating something that I value very highly, which is that the purpose of being an entrepreneur should be to make a difference on the planet. And that I believe that high purpose entrepreneurs can and will and are already saving the world from itself. Those headphones are an example of that. These headphones that we're wearing, this company, LSTN, for every pair that they sell, they pay to have somebody's hearing restored. And to date, they've had, I don't know, maybe.
I didn't know that. I did not get that at all. I just thought they were really steezy headphones with our logo on them.
And they sound great, and they're steezy, and now they have a meaning when you put them on that's going to remind, you're never going to forget that, hey, these are a great reminder. The reason to get on your podcast today is because of the difference you're making in the world, right? So giftology, that's part of our philosophy. The other thing,
how do you like, I'm just not that thoughtful, okay? I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to buy carry gifts, right? Because like, what do I have? I have Christmas, I have our anniversary, I have Valentine's Day. And by the way, if you haven't seen the Lewis Black rant on Valentine's Day from the guy perspective, it's
I gotta check it out.
You gotta watch it on YouTube.
It's like a lose-lose. Yeah.
Lewis Black. He's like, 6 weeks after Christmas, we got a what? It's I think it's very funny. Anyway, so you got Christmas, Valentine's Day, anniversary, and birthday. So I got 4, right? We all have, if you're married to somebody or, committed, whatever you want to call it, then you probably got those 4 plus or minus, right? And then if you have kids, then you got all that, right? And so I guess my point is, I can't think of 4 thoughtful things to give her a year. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck to do. I don't know what to do. And if you get like lingerie, well, God bless her, she wears it, but like, that's a gift for us. So it sort of doesn't really count. And so like, I guess my point is, I can't come up with 4 thoughtful gifts to give to the most important person in my life. And you guys send me something awesome every 6 weeks. So how do I be more thoughtful? I want to be more like John, and certainly more like Scott, and the Gobo guys who sent me the Cutco knife and like all this awesome shit you guys do that is so generous and sweet. And the word that is in my mind is thoughtful. So how do I be more thoughtful?
Gosh, I don't know. It's got to be a priority, or to use in the parlance of our times, a strategy. There's a, and I'm going to screw this up, but it's either a Buddhist or a Zen saying. So it's one of the two. There's a type of wisdom I think it's called Parajana wisdom. And the way I was introduced to this, which might not be what it really means, but it's the idea that if you've ever met somebody where when you meet them in that moment, you realize that there is this potential, there's a seed of potential for that to be a lifelong, really important relationship. And contrast that with all the people I meet where I certainly know there's no seed for a lifelong, or I don't think there is. But Parajana wisdom is the ability to experience the meaning of the moment, not after it happens. And when I saw you speak at the GoBundance event, and we had a fun exchange too, we'd never met, and you spoke and I went up and I basically pimped you out by auctioning you to a bunch of people in the audience.
Well, and I kind of have a bone to pick with you about that. Remember what you did, you bastard?
We probably kept nibbling away at your generosity.
Yeah, that would be one way to say it. Yeah.
So
yeah. Anyway, keep going.
So there's a few ways to look at it. One of them is my first time you and I met, I not only, when you gave your message, I thought I'm living this message personally, and I had the privilege to live it with Vitamix, an iconic category king. So I can't speak for everyone else, but I heard your message and thought I could not appreciate a message more deeply than your message at that event. So that was a part of me that thought, this is somebody who there's a chance that we might really resonate for a long time and have fun together and create value together. So that's part of what says, hey, what could be something cool that sends that kind of message to Christopher? So sending you this shit in the mail is one way to do it. And the other thing too is I think it's how often are we not thanked when there is generosity? And even if I never connected the dots for you, the fact that you were willing to offer up your time for us to auction that off to help out One Life Fully Lived, I thought there is no number of gifts that we could send you that are ever going to equate to what you generated for One Life Fully Lived. And I'm a big fan of there's no need, it's a bad idea to ever keep score. So I could really care less how many things we've sent you at this point. But those are that's, I guess, if I had to say what's going on in my head with why we sent these things, those are a few of them.
But I get the strategy, and I understand, and anybody can tell when they're being worked, right? That's not been the experience at all. The thing that's different about what you guys do in terms of the experience you've given me, kind of welcoming you guys or welcoming me into your tribe, which is how the experience has felt to me, or at least part of it anyway, is it's that you're sending, like, you're so thoughtful about the stuff, right? It's not like, you didn't send me, I don't know,
Flowers.
golf clubs, right?
Yeah.
With all due respect, I don't even know if you play golf. With all due respect, I know tons of people love golf. I think golf is a wanker thing, but that's
I love
that's
golf.
just me. I'm sorry. Do you really?
Yeah.
Do you really? I know a lot of guys do, and I've never played a proper round of golf in my life. I could tell you the only real golf course I've ever played on. That's a fun story if you like. But yeah, so a lot of times you could send some guy in business some golf thing. You make an assumption that he plays golf, and you just heard my opinion about golf. And so you guys are incredibly thoughtful. And so is there this thing that goes off in your head when you meet certain people? You go, hey, that's somebody who I could be in a relationship with for some period of time. And did you learn how to be that thoughtful? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I guess I had to learn to be that. Yeah, I think it's something I learned. And I think I have a network of peers and business partners and friends who we've all made it kind of a playful game. Like, it's a game to send you that F-bomb. That's a fun game to think, okay, what would be something that when Christopher pulls out of the package, he'll fall over laughing about, right? And, the headphones aren't going to do that, but the F-bomb might. So that's just fun. I look at it like if I can tell there's a chance that I have met someone that could become a lifelong friend and a lifelong relationship, why should I wait until the end of our lives to have fun thanking that person or acknowledging that friendship? Start now. Have fun with it.
I love it. And I have two friends who are sort of very good at this around life events or milestones. So Al Ramadan, the co-author of Play Bigger, and my adopted brother and my adopted brother and dear friend Ben Ruiz. They're both these guys are they're thoughtful in a different way, in that at different points in people's lives, right? So they feel it's very important to mark milestones along the way and to take a minute to really do that. And I've found that's powerful. I didn't want a 40th birthday. I was like, fuck, I don't have birthdays. I could give a shit, right? And what I realized over time was, because I had some friends who wanted to throw me a 40th birthday party. I told them not to, well, hey, if I died, a bunch of people would get to, or I should say when, I hope a couple people would get together and say he wasn't an asshole. So let's do that while I'm alive. So I've evolved on this topic. And so, I'm hopeful that I can have a fun 50th birthday party. But to your point, mostly because my friends have taught me, hey, you know what? Mark it. One of the things I love about about the Jewish faith and culture, I think bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs are great. And so my friend Ben Ruiz, who's to the best of my knowledge, not Jewish, when his son was sort of at that age where he was about to go to college and that kind of stuff, he organized a group of men in his life, and he did this, there's no other word for it, but ceremony for a group of guys that he respects and admires to share some things with his son. And it was, it's a very powerful thing to go do. And, if you're not Jewish, you don't get a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, right? And whatever it is, whether it's in the company's life, I think legendary teams of any kind celebrate successes and important milestones, and not just celebrate, but take a moment to say, okay, wait a minute, what just happened here? Let's just be with what happened here for a second, because it's really powerful. And so, yeah, you've left me in a place of, I'm going to work on trying to be thoughtful. I'm terrible. And the dot I've connected with that is also this sort of milestone. There are moments in life, whether it's somebody's age or something that happens more serendipitously, or something that happens in a business, big sale or a big thing happens, or in the venture capital world, we sell companies, we go public, all this stuff happens. It's really worth to take a moment and reflect on that moment, not just pop some champagne, want to pop champagne, but really reflect on that moment and look back and acknowledge and have maybe I've been living on the West Coast too long, but hold hands and have a little kumbaya, like, hey, something legendary just happened here.
Yeah. And I think our good friend Jon Berghoff just wrote a book, just published, called The Front Row Factor. And it's about what he calls the art of moment making. And one of the things that I've learned from him, Christopher, is that sometimes the greatest gift we can give to another person is to be the one that causes them to pause, to celebrate, because people don't do that for themselves. So be the person for others who says, hey, let's stop and actually own what you or what your organization just did, because life is short. We've got to celebrate everything.
What I love about what Roman's doing and talking about in his work and his book is it's powerful in big ways and powerful in little ways. So, I was ranting earlier about United Airlines. Well, when you go check in at an airline, do you look at the guy or the gal who's checking you in behind the counter in the eye?
Yeah. Yeah.
When you go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Right. And I find I try to continuously train myself and remind myself to just be with people, just be with those people. Just, how are you? It's an amazing thing when you can, at a grocery store, look at somebody in the eye and just say, how are you?
Yeah.
And I know it sounds corny, but like, if you actually do that and you're present to that, you might be the first person that interacted with them in an authentic way in a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if you listen to them, holy shit.
Yeah. I think Thomas Friedman, in his book that he just published, Thank You for Being Late, I think one of the things he talks about is, in his book, is about we're living in this age of accelerating change with technology and social connectedness and environmental change. And I think it's one of his conclusions, Christopher, is he says, he talks about how we've never been more connected, yet we are plagued in our country. The greatest disease that we're plagued by is disconnectedness. And I'm guilty of it. I'm the guy who, more often than not, I'm taking a business call while I'm shopping at Whole Foods, and I'll stay on that call while I'm buying my groceries. And then it hit me recently how shitty that makes me feel. And then I thought, what about the person on the other side? So I've lived it. That's an area where I've lost, and I want to be better in what you just described.
It's amazing when you just look at somebody in the eye. Not in a threatening way. I don't mean staring them down or anything like that. I mean, just look at them in the eye like a human being. Yeah. And actually, Carter Roberts, who is the chief executive of the World Wildlife Fund here in the United States, I think my favorite quote of his is, he says, everything changes when you look into the eye of an animal. It's true with animals too, right? You look your dog in the eye or your cat in the eye, right?
Yeah.
And when that animal looks back at you with those loving eyes, like that's a transformative experience.
Yeah.
And so, not to go overly corny, but I mean, I think it's true with maybe not every living being, but it's certainly true with a lot of them.
I do it with my kids. And I also have noticed in my kids when they're afraid to make eye contact, and it's telling me something, right? And it's telling me something, and I want to make that connection. And you bring this full circle to what we talked about today, this idea of engagement in the workplace, real engagement. Hey, I could have a ping pong table and a water slide. What if we all just made eye contact for a day? What if we all just asked each other, how are you really doing for a day? Yeah, what could that do?
Yeah. It's an amazing thing. And I love doing it in just day-to-day life. Yeah. So Jon, before we kick out of this wave, is there anything else?
One of the great questions. Thank you. Thanks for doing what you're doing. And thank you also, because I've gotten to know this about you, for being someone who is driven by a really high purpose, which is to see entrepreneurship thrive. And the reason why I thank you for that is because one of our missions at FLI is we want to see more and more leaders and entrepreneurs to be driven by the highest possible motivations, not just their bottom line or how it looks or feels to win, but even beyond that, the impact they'll make. And I know you care about that, and I know everyone listening to your show feels that. So thanks for setting that example.
Well, I don't know what example I'm setting, but thank you. You know,
Wait, I got to tell you, when I'm leaving the door today, my son's seeing my shirt, my 7-year-old.
I love that we're wearing our shirts today. For those of you on YouTube, you can see it. If you're not on YouTube, we're both wearing matching Legends and Losers shirts. And of course, because Jon got me these headphones that I wear all the time, they're my headphones now. We're wearing matching headphones, so it's kind of corny. But anyway, so your son saw your Legends and Losers
he
shirt.
sees my shirt, and he's like, "Dad, I've never seen that shirt." And he's 7. His name's Ace. I said, "Ace, I'm going to be on a."
His name is Ace. I love that his name is Ace. just what are your kids' names? Let's get them all on the table.
Ace, Sierra, and Kaizen is our third.
I love it. And Kaizen is a Japanese term for continuous improvement. If I remember my Kaizen training well. I actually did some Kaizening early in my career, but that's a whole other story.
So Ace sees the shirt, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to be on a show." And he's in school, and he goes, "Well, can I watch the recording?" I said, "Yeah." And I told him, I said, "There's probably going to be some bad language." And he has this, he looks at me and he just has this smile and he goes, "I'll watch the recording."
You know, the funny thing is, and I may not be the right person to talk to about swearing, but but the interesting thing with kids, right? People get very excited when you say fuck in front of a child, or some people do anyway. And of course, I say fuck in front of children all the time. And as does Carrie. And the funny thing about that, you know, is children understand that, like, okay, you should not go to school and say what Uncle Christopher said. Like, they get it. You don't even have to tell them. They don't. It's interesting. You could say fuck 1,000 times around a 5-year-old, 7-year-old child, and it doesn't mean they're going to run around saying fuck. They get it. It's kids are fucking smart.
We should clip this segment and give it to our dad's group where we teach them about parenting. Perfect.
Absolutely. Feel free to swear freely in front of your children. And actually, all kidding aside, the real thing I think that resonates with kids is full self-expression.
Mm-hmm.
Some kids are not used to seeing adults who are fully expressed. And so I actually think not to sound immodest, but, you know, children dig me because they know I'm only 12, right? And so I'm the kind of person that children would gravitate to in a room when they come into the room and like that, and I'll play with them and so forth, right? And it's amazing that they get all of that stuff, and I think they get it. And the reason they can filter out the swear words is because what they're really, I think, relating to is an adult who's fully expressed and at least making an attempt at being who they actually are. And so for me, swearing is a natural self-expression. And you notice I don't I rarely ever swear at someone.
Mm.
Right. And so it's not that it's not that kind of an aggressive thing. It's an accent. It's putting emphasis on a particular syllable. And so I think kids dig that, is, I guess, my point.
I get it. Well, thanks, buddy. It's been
Well,
awesome.
I'm glad that Ace wants to check out Legends and Losers. And I know one thing for sure about Ace, which is his dad's a legend.
Appreciate that, buddy. It's been great.
And, I got to thank you, John. I mean, you're an absolute inspiration. I love what you're doing with Flourishing Leadership. I think it's so important. I think the time is now because people have had it with not doing real meaningful work and having meaning at work, and teaching people to have powerful conversations and around powerful questions. It's like Bick said, what we do for a living is talk.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what we put in our minds and what comes out of our mouths literally determines the quality of our life.
Yeah, it's true.
And so I appreciate what you're doing so much. And I am so glad to have been welcomed so vigorously into the Flourishing Leadership world, the John Berman front row world, the Scott Lowry Fathom world. You guys, it's all one world.
It is.
You guys are awesome. Oh, and I forgot Brother James.
Oh, yeah.
Brother James has put me in the Brother James world. He sent me, he's another one of you guys who's all thoughtful and shit. He sent me some Brother James t-shirts and some swag and obviously music. And we'll talk about Brother James on another show. But that last time you were around, we were watching, his stuff is unbelievable, isn't it? He's
created a category.
It's a new category. Motivational speaker meets insane one-man band musician, right? And great songwriter and performer. And he's, why hire a motivational speaker when you can have a motivational musician, music that inspires, right?
Yeah, and he's good. It's great.
Yeah, he's really, really good. Brother James. He's got a great name. And I love that he, like, when he introduces himself, he spells it with you, right?
Brotha. James. Yeah.
Brother James.
Oh, dude,
It must be a blast introducing yourself. Hi, I'm Brother James.
But wait a minute. And my team is over here. Yeah, they're throwing shit at me. They're literally throwing.
Does that mean it's time for you to go?
They just threw the shrimp pillow at me.
You're getting shrimped?
Apparently, there's like 30 people waiting for me on a call. And yeah.
Well, tell those 30 people it's all my fault, and I kept it too long because I think you're legendary.
Hey, appreciate you, brother. Talk soon, man.
Dr. Berghoff, thank you.
See you, buddy. Bye.
Well, there it is, Jon Berghoff. And if you like this episode, check out our episode with Bix Bixen, the legendary future hacker. Nothing more fun than hanging out with Berghoff, huh?
He's fantastic.
Please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and/or YouTube. This podcast is not free. It costs you 2 minutes to give us a legendary review.
Find us on Facebook.com/groups/Legends and Losers.
You can find us on the Twitter machine @LegendsLosers.
And on email, blackhole@legendsandlosers.com.
We would like to thank Equity Directory, connecting startups to the talent and resources they need to build a legendary business.
HarperCollins' best-selling book, Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets.
OneLifeFullyLive.org, the nonprofit helping you dream, plan, and live your best life.
Flip Collier for naming Legends and Losers. Thanks, Flip.
NetSuite, #1 in cloud ERP. Get next ready.
Mayo Technology in San Jose, California, mixed method recovery.
The Flourishing Leadership Institute. We facilitate change.
The great podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire, with John Lee Dumas.
Kiva.org, loans that change lives.
Scotch. Scottish people make awesome booze.
Trade-off, Why Some Things Catch On and Others Don't, the bestseller from Kevin Maney.
Fathom, marketing that accelerates revenue at fathomdelivers.com.
One Mission, How Leaders Build a Team of Teams, the amazing new book coming out this June from our friend and guest on Legends and Losers Navy SEAL, Chris Fussell. Today's information is provided to you solely for informational purposes.
This oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and please share the shit out of it.
This oddcast was produced in a studio that contains nuts.
Teach appreciative inquiry.
Support your local farmers.
Fonzie was right.
Listen to Chris Cornell.
We hated United Airlines decades before it was cool.
When you're done listening to this show, please be kind and rewind.
Introduce two people you love to two podcasts you love.
This oddcast really ties the room together.
And hey, our apologies to Greg Clark, CEO of Symantec. Sorry, Greg, we just ran out of time for you.
Be legendary, people.
All right, be legendary.